Welcome back, everyone, to Einstein's Eyes. I am Carl Rosen, an oculoplastic surgeon and formerly a neuro-ophthalmologist, fellowship trained in Anchorage, Alaska at Ophthalmic Associates, where I am the head of a multi-specialty practice, largest practice in Anchorage, Alaska. I am your co-host, my friend, partner, and former co-resident and co-host, Jon Ditkoff. Jon?
Hi, all. So I met Carl over 30 years ago at Albert Einstein, hence Einstein's Eyes. And that's where we did our training. And I've been in New Jersey now for 30 years doing general ophthalmology, specializing in cornea. Very excited about a topic a little bit off today and something I don't know much about. So I'm looking forward to learning.
Right. And we are going to unravel the complexities of healthcare through an expert conversation with Jon's brother, Charlie Ditkoff. And this is really a timely and critical topic because we're going to try to understand practice and hospital mergers for physicians, their practices, their community practices, the hospitals they work in under Trump 45, Biden, and Trump 47 administrations, how they're similar, how they're different, how they may be more lenient coming up. But this is going to be a really interesting topic, focusing on antitrust rules and possibly the FTC. But joining me today and Jon is Jon's brother, as I mentioned, Charlie Ditkoff. Charlie's had an illustrious career. He's an expert. He had leadership roles at the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, where he really was responsible and directed groundbreaking deals in the healthcare sector. If I get it wrong, Charlie, just correct me. He served on the boards, advised major firms, and he's also earned degrees from Brown and Yale Law School. And Charlie, thanks a million for being here. We're really interested in learning about this interesting topic regarding the healthcare landscape. But let me start with some context. So during the Trump administration, the healthcare industry saw significant changes in antitrust enforcement. Can you walk us through how these changes impacted practices and hospital mergers?
Well, I think historically, the way you need to think about the antitrust laws is that they used to be more aggressively enforced as a general matter. And then as time progressed and as the economy became global, people started looking at markets differently. So entities in the United States that we might perceive as having very powerful market share, although that may be true in the United States, globally they may not have been. And so as a result, the antitrust enforcers started allowing a lot more transactions go through than they had historically. So what you saw in the 80s and the 90s was a tremendous amount of consolidation in the healthcare sector. And as many of you know, combination of the private equity firms purchasing and consolidating practices and, of course, hospitals, and the larger tax-exempt hospitals acquiring other hospitals, and, of course, hospitals acquiring physician practices. That has been an extremely active area of banking activity. And it was very, very active in the first Trump administration. When President Biden took over, he set a completely different tone in terms of his perspective on healthcare mergers, in particular, private equity involved mergers, and in particular, any healthcare deals. Lena Khan, who many of you have heard of, is a very young woman who took over the FTC. She also went to Yale Law School. While she was at Yale Law School, she wrote a paper basically attacking Amazon and some other large technology companies as violators of antitrust laws under a new theory of antitrust, which is beyond the scope of this call. But suffice it to say that she signaled loud and clear that the Biden administration was going to aggressively attack any attempts at consolidating practice management businesses or hospitals, or for that matter, any other industry during her tenure. And she followed through on that. She did that in two ways. She did that, number one, by challenging very actively any announced mergers. She announced also a policy, as I just mentioned, to attack prospectively and warned people that she would attack any sort of deals like that, particularly deals in healthcare, particularly deals involving private equity. And then the third thing she did was she slowed down the processes in which you need to seek FTC approval. And in the deal world, sometimes delaying a deal is almost as bad as blocking it. So with those three arrows in her quiver, as we bankers used to say, she basically slowed healthcare merger activity to a grinding halt. And as many of you know, although there continues to be small amounts of deals being done, lots of hospital mergers have been challenged, and lots of practice management mergers have been challenged. And so as a result, there's been very little activity on that front since the Biden administration. And what is going to happen next, of course, is always an unknown, but it is clear that Lina Khan will not be maintaining her role at the FTC. And of course, the Justice Department, which joins with the FTC in enforcing the antitrust laws, will also have significant change of leadership. As a result, you're definitely going to see a new attitude in Washington. Now, of course, what that will be is yet to be determined. I mean, President Trump and the people who work for President Trump, often state that they're economic populists, that they're worried about the little people in the small business world. And, arguably that would seem to suggest that they would be very, very opposed to large mergers, particularly in the technology space or in the media space. However, what they will do in terms of hospitals or practice management businesses is less clear, because those tend not to be large multinational, national dominant franchisees, and they tend not to attract President-elect, soon to be President Trump's ire and the people who work with him attention. The other thing is President Trump certainly does not have a track record or any history in stopping private equity firms from engaging in activity. So the assumption is going to be that once President Trump assumes office and replaces Lina Khan, that M&A activity will increase across the board, across all industries. And the assumption in healthcare is that will also occur in healthcare. Now, there's a couple of things that counterbalance that, which haven't gotten as much attention because they're a little more complicated. The first thing, which it really involves more pharmaceutical companies, but it's just worth mentioning, is it's still unclear what President Trump is going to do in terms of negotiating pricing with pharmaceutical companies under Medicare. So a lot of companies outside of hospitals and practice management businesses might be reluctant to move ahead with any transactions until they have more transparency on that. But with regard to the hospitals, the big issue right now in the hospitals is, will the Trump administration continue the policy of tax subsidies to people on the Affordable Care Act? So again, I assume most of you are familiar with the fact that under the Affordable Care Act, obviously extremely poor people who are just above Medicare or Medicaid are getting access to plans, but some of the people who are even further above the poverty line are getting subsidies by the government too. And if that were to stop, those people would be sort of caught in the middle, too wealthy for Medicaid, but not wealthy enough to afford plans. And so the hospitals, and I'm sure physicians as well, should be concerned that if that happens, there'll be a greater uninsured population in the US. And if there's a greater uninsured population in the US, that's going to lead to increased bad debt expense in the hospitals, leading them to be less attractive as partners. And also physicians, I assume, will have similar problems collecting from patients. So the assumption right now in the healthcare financial world is that there's going to be a significant increase in M&A activity. Private equity firms will not be in the crosshair anymore of Lina's rifle. And there won't be this negative inclination toward positive inclination towards blocking deals. At the same time, it's unclear what Trump's going to do regarding these tax subsidies. The Republican Congress has historically been against these subsidies for the usual reasons that the GOP is against subsidies. And of course, as you know, the GOP was against the Affordable Care Act to begin with. So, those are big questions hanging over the market, and we will have to see, how that shakes out. So that's an overview. I'm sorry I went a little long there, but that's kind of the essence of what's going on.
No, it's great. It's great. So just to give you a little background, so John and I have talked about private equity with regards to community practices and practices like the one John and I own and are involved with. And they can have some positive effects depending on where in your career you're located, but oftentimes they can have negative effects as far as patient care and overall management. I mean, John, you would agree to that, right?
Yeah, so Charlie and I talk about this often, as well as my other brother, which is the balance. Private equity offers certain advantages to small practices. They try to get better rates for those doctors. They negotiate for them. Theoretically, they might be able to give better benefits to the employees. There's strength in numbers, like a lot of things in America. But what we've been seeing is not just for doctors who have suffered under that leadership, meaning they're not as happy, they're not as fulfilled, but you're seeing patient dissatisfaction. And that's one of the things we hear about, and they're changing the rules. I mean, one of the conversations Charlie and I had early in the year, and this would be a tangent, but about doing C-sections as an outpatient. I mean, that's been unheard of for many years, but it's simply a cost savings. And they're not really worried about that one patient that might run into trouble. They just look at the numbers and say, hey, look how much money we could save if all C-sections were done as outpatients. So again, that's a tangent. But yeah, Charlie, give us your view of the balance in private equity, what you've seen in medicine.
Right. So as Johnny knows,
future looks like.
Right. So as Johnny knows, I made a living representing private equity firms in acquiring hospitals and physician practice management businesses, among other things. So if you look at the current environment, if you look at the very large practice management businesses out there, I worked on almost all those transactions. And the successful investor-owned hospital companies, not Steward, which I never worked on, but the successful investor-owned hospital companies, for example, HCA, those were all my clients, and the private equity firms that own them were also my clients. And so I have a relatively positive view of private equity's role in capitalizing, healthcare businesses. What people have to understand, and what I think physicians sometimes don't understand and hospital administrators don't understand, is that they compare what they're experiencing now to what they experienced before. And the problem is that the main reason, in my opinion, that practice management businesses and hospitals are suffering, and therefore doctors are suffering, is because of health insurance companies and the government. So, there would be no need for private equity firms to be investing in these businesses. And in fact, historically, they did not until the 90s. There were very few private equity investments in healthcare services. I did actually quite a few of the first ones. And the reason was that private equity guys did not like to invest in healthcare services because of the complexity of it and the regulatory risk. So it was not an area that they spent any time on. And the only reason they started spending time in the industry was, first of all, because their businesses grew and they needed more areas to invest in. But the other reason was because the public markets had given up on these companies. And the reason the public markets had given up on these companies was because the government's regulations, reimbursement cuts, and the health insurance companies' pressure made these very unattractive businesses. And the best example of that was seen in the late 90s when the federal government cut reimbursement in the nursing home industry and basically drove the entire industry into bankruptcy. When physicians and patients get upset, they're very often they're upset with the businesses that they're in, and they associate private equity firms with those businesses. But it isn't necessarily true that the private equity firms are necessarily causing the problems that the physicians and the patients are upset about. Now, I do know, and I'm sure it's true, like in all things, there are private equity firms that are not good managers. And as a result, they may choose or not understand that by sacrificing quality, or patient care, make short-term profits. In the long run, they're going to actually threaten their business. And the best example of that, which is all over the papers, and I'm sure you're all familiar with, is the Steward healthcare situation. Now, I never worked on any of the Steward transactions. I did meet the CEO when he first took over the business. I stayed away from him, partly because of his attitude generally. So I never, luckily, got involved with him. But that's a situation which, of course, all the politicians are now holding up as a poster boy of the evils of private equity getting involved in healthcare. And it's really partly that, but it's also partly because they're just a lot of greedy people and, they did the wrong thing. Now, the other thing that people in practice management have been pointing to is there's some very large practice management companies. One's called Team Health and one is called Envision, which primarily run emergency rooms. And they've gone through financial trouble. And the truth is, this is undoubtedly true. When private equity firms get involved, they put leverage on businesses, financial leverage. They put debt on businesses. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. The more debt you put on a business, the more financial risk and volatility you have. You have less margin for error by definition when you have debt on a business. And so that is a legitimate issue that politicians and other people have pointed out. And finally, private equity firms, most of them are private. And the businesses they own are generally private, although they might have public debt. And so their businesses and operations are less opaque or less transparent. And so again, there can be more surprises from a private equity firm operated business than in a publicly traded business where you can see things coming from further away. So again, I totally, because of my three brothers are physicians and my wife's a physician, and because I know a lot of physicians.
And your dad.
And my father, right? I'm aware of the issues that people have had with private equity, and I've been talking to my brothers about private equity invested practices since the 90s when it really began, and so I see both sides of it. But again, it's too simplistic to say that private equity firms are the problem. It's much more a combination of things that has been causing this, and the leverage that private equity firms can put on a business can exacerbate those problems.
Yeah, I would add one thing. I mean, that you were alluding to it, but coming from a doctor's perspective, I think that's what's pushed a lot of friends and associates of mine to either sell or join private equity is, as you put it out, the insurance companies are publicly traded companies in there for profit. So what do? They were lowering medical reimbursement to the doctors and the hospitals, bankrupting some hospitals. But as long as they were making money, it was all good. But what happened was doctors saw the writing on the wall. So what they saw was, if I can't get better rates, I'm going to be out of business. So it kind of pushed them towards private equity, because private equity
and hospitals.
Yeah, and hospitals even more. It pushed them to, hey, there's something we're not good at. We're not joining forces enough, and we're not negotiating, and we don't have a seat at the table with these insurance companies to get the rates. But when they did join forces, they had sophisticated financial people that, even if they didn't understand medicine, they could walk in there and say, listen, we want this, otherwise we're walking. And that did help the doctors for a short term, for a long term, and the hospitals too.
So to bring this back to antitrust, the crux of antitrust analysis is something going on that is anti-competitive in a market, right? And historically, the focus was on how that kind of activity in a market affected consumers. So in this case, we're talking about patients.
Right.
Historically, antitrust law did not care about other businesses. So for example, if a hospital got dominant market share and used that market share to pressure physicians, that in and of itself was not supposed to be an issue for the antitrust people. It was only supposed to be an issue for the antitrust regulators if it led to increased costs for patients. And what's interesting is, and that's one of the reasons why the antitrust enforcers allowed the health insurance companies to consolidate. The irony that I'm sure most physicians and hospitals recognize is their mergers are constantly being blocked. Yet when you look at the world, there's only 5 in the United States. There's only 3 or 4 large health insurers. And where were the regulators then? There are only a couple of pharmaceutical benefit managers. Where were the regulators then? There are only a couple of wholesale drug distributors. You can go on and on and on. And so what happened was, as the managed care
We have
companies,
two videos about PBMs, but that's
right.
it.
Well,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
worked on many PBM mergers. And so while this was all going on, the logical reaction, obviously, when you're person you're dealing with across the table is to get larger, is you get larger. The problem is that when the hospitals and the doctors got larger, prices to consumers went up. And so that is something that the antitrust regulators are supposed to deal with. The antitrust regulators, in theory, don't really care if health insurance companies squeeze suppliers.
Right.
And it's kind of ironic. Now, for those of you who use Uber, enjoy it while you can, because the problem with Uber is that Uber is great right now. It's a discount to taxis, but they're driving all the taxis out of business.
Right.
And when they drive all those taxis out of business, Uber is going to be the only game in town. What I think is happening with the health insurance folks is that, they've gotten really big and they're very powerful, and they started buying up physicians, which, is almost ironic. And, that's really where I always thought the regulators missed the boat, because if they had, but again, remember what the regulators are focused on, prices to patients. And in their minds, this is the irony, they only look at premiums that patients pay. They're not sophisticated enough to actually look at how the consumers are being treated by the health insurance companies.
Right.
And what are you going to do if you're an average person and you're an employer, which is really the people who employ these insurance companies? You don't have a lot of choices, really. And it's also very confusing because a lot of the employers are really the insurance companies. The health insurance businesses, what we think of as health insurance businesses, they're just administering the plan that the employer has developed in coordination with the health insurance company. So, for example, if Aetna denies a claim, in a lot of ways, Aetna's not denying the claim to save Aetna money. Aetna's denying the claim to save the employer money. And the employer is hiding behind Aetna. And so there's a lot of, now, of course, it is true that the insurance company is denying that claim, because by denying that claim, they get paid by the employer to do that. And so there is a profit motive obviously driving all this, but it's a lot more complicated than, folks realize. And the bottom line is that a lot of these hospital mergers and physician practice mergers are being blocked because, even though from a national point of view, the hospitals and these practices might not be significant from a national point of view, the antitrust guys don't look at national markets necessarily. They look at local markets as well. And so there's a big case that happened a few years recently where an anesthesia practice got sued in Texas by the federal government, and it's owned by Welsh Carson, which is a private equity firm. Originally, Welsh Carson was sued. I think they were dropped from the lawsuit, and still, the lawsuit's still pending against the anesthesia company. But again, this is a business that is only operating in one state. So it has very little market power nationally, but in that particular state, it's very, very powerful. And so when hospitals try to merge in local communities to get increased pricing power against these health insurance companies, very often they get blocked.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
Now, what is going to happen? I mean, the other last issue to put on the table here is that during the Trump administration, rates for Medicare Advantage were very, very advantageous. If you look at health insurance stocks during the first Trump administration, they did incredibly well. And all the health insurance businesses invested aggressively in Medicare Advantage, both buying plans and also buying providers who provide Medicare Advantage, including specific physician practices. Walgreens and CVS did as well. During the Biden administration, the latter part of the Biden administration, last 2 years, the Biden administration, I think, realized that maybe Medicare Advantage had some issues, and they started pressuring the providers of Medicare Advantage, penalizing them, re-rating their quality, and therefore reducing their reimbursement. Lots of things that basically made Medicare Advantage very, very, very unattractive, or a lot less attractive than it had been. And that has hit very hard the health insurance companies. Just look at the stock price of CVS, for example, which owns Aetna. Look at Humana's stock price, which was the largest pure play Medicare Advantage company, and Cigna actually got out of the Medicare Advantage business. So Trump's now president again soon. And what will he do regarding Medicare Advantage? Is he going to help once again by increasing the rates? And will he lay off regulating these health insurance companies? If that happens, the health insurance companies will do better. And when they do better, it's in their interest to lay off the physicians and the patients a little bit more, because they don't like the constant complaining and the bad press. I don't want to get into what just happened at United, but so when the pandemic occurred, and you guys were all familiar with this, utilization went down like all across the board, and the managed care companies just made a ton of money because they're getting the same premiums. And when the Biden administration took over and the pandemic ended and the lockup ended, also utilization has been catching up. And as a result, the managed care plans have been caught in this vice between catch-up utilization and increased focus on their Medicare Advantage rates. And they've been hit pretty hard. And that's why they've turned around and started once again applying tremendous pressure to patients and physicians, which is, one of the reasons why there's been a lot more friction in the market lately than there might have been, let's say, 5 years ago. Now, physicians have been aware of it the whole time because you're dealing with them every day. Patients had it, relatively easy for a while. And people don't care about physicians. I mean, that's the sad fact. In Washington, D.C., there are a few physicians in Congress, and physicians, are relatively, they're an active lobbying organization, but their lobbying power pales in comparison to that of the hospitals and the health insurance companies and the pharmaceutical businesses. And so, that's just the way it is. So that's a long answer to a simple question, but yeah, short answer, antitrust enforcement should go down. How it will actually affect healthcare will be a function of how Medicare Advantage is treated by the Trump administration, and obviously how they work on Medicare pricing with pharmaceutical companies. And I do think private equity firms, regardless, are going to be more active because the pressure will definitely be off them.
Good stuff, right, Carl?
Yeah, no, great stuff. There's so much here. We could talk about. I love the leverage buyout stuff and the debt, which doctors just don't get. And it's so dangerous because they just don't understand. They just see a big check. They don't understand that, holy cow, I'm strapped with this. I got this thing on my back now. And they really don't understand it. And that's why you need a finance course, but they don't teach that in medical school.
Well, if you want, I'll come back in a month or so when you guys want, and I will walk you guys through why and how the leverage works. But again, remember, if the value of these businesses were high, the private equity firms would not be owning them. And so there's a reason that public investors are avoiding these companies, and that has opened the door to the private equity firms. And so the real question is, why is that? And the answer is health insurance companies. You don't see, now, by the way, private equity firms don't own health insurance companies. There's two reasons for that. One is they're not undervalued, but the second reason is that health insurance companies are regulated at the state level by the Department of Insurance. And the Department of Insurance looks at whether the financial viability of the health insurance subsidiaries so Cigna, let's say they operate nationally, but they're literally operating in 13 or 14 or 25 or 45 states, and they have to make filings with each state's Department of Insurance. And the Department of Insurance looks at their financial viability, and if they have leverage on the thing, then they don't pass the test, and then the insurance department comes down and regulates them. So that's why you don't see, or have never seen, we looked at doing these deals, by the way. In the 90s, we almost took a few health insurance companies private. And at the end of the day, we did not. And the main reason was that.
Stakes are high. There's too much risk if it goes.
Right. Well, because imagine what happens if you're a patient and you've been paying premiums into your health insurance company and they go belly up. Right. Now, what's ironic is health insurance is unique for so many reasons. Again, that would be a whole session. But in a nutshell, when you buy life insurance, you typically stay with that insurer for life.
Yeah.
When you buy health insurance, you literally can quit each year. So if you were to look at your health insurance business and say, gee, I don't think they're financially doing so well, I think I'll switch out. So in a way, health insurance companies, in a way, are the most likely to be able to be taken private and put financial leverage on. But even those, and by the way, given how few there are, I mean, there are states where there's only one or two payers now. Alabama,
my state, Alaska.
Yeah, Alabama. You know, I don't know if you saw it, and I'll let you guys go, but today there was an article, or yesterday there was an article about how Michigan Blue Cross is no longer paying for these weight loss drugs.
Oh, interesting.
And, you know, there isn't a lot of alternative for people because that's a big payer in Michigan. And what they're doing is they're basically telling people that unless they have actual diabetes, you know, unless they have diabetes, they can't use that drug anymore. And they also are imposing other limitations on the patient. So,
Wow.
you know, we'll see how that works out. All right. I know you guys have a time limit, so.
No, Charlie, listen, thank you so much. That was for sharing your insights. That was awesome. You know, mergers are shaping the very fabric of healthcare, and understanding the impact for providers, for guys like John and I, and for patients alike is really important. But we are definitely going to have you back. I'd love to talk about the leverage buyout ins and outs, and you know, the finance theory behind that, because that's super interesting. At least I think to physicians and to myself.
And everyone should Google Lina, Lina Khan, Kahn.
Yeah, I've seen her in front of congressional
sure you have.
committees. Yeah. She's really interesting. So, John, anything else?
It was just nice for Carl to meet the smarter Ditkoff. You know, all you out there that are watching my YouTube videos, now you know there's another brother.
I'm the Ditkoff
More
who
intelligent.
can't. I'm the Ditkoff who can't perceive things in 3 dimensions.
Oh, neither can I. But that's okay.
Yeah, but not as
John,
bad as me.
John and I had to, because we did cataract surgery.
Right, I can't. That's why I didn't go to medical school.
Right. No, you did very well. But thanks again a million, Charlie. And for everyone, if you enjoyed this and you found this interesting, please share, like, and subscribe. And you guys will see Charles Ditkoff back here because he's so informative, and I learned a tremendous amount. And we'll see you guys on the next one. So thanks a million, guys.